Greetings, dear friends, fellow programmers, and those aspiring to be. In this video, as I promised in the previous one, we will start talking about concepts in JavaScript that will make you an amazing developer. So, why wait any longer? We can just proceed and start our discussion about scopes in JavaScript. It's a core concept that you certainly want to understand completely, and you must have a very firm grasp on the concept if you want to be an amazing developer. Because when the foundation of your knowledge of JavaScript is not solid, you will definitely have more difficult time understanding advanced concepts like closures we covered in the previous videos, or, in example, the upcoming two videos that are scope chaining and also lexical scopes. So, in order to master all of these, you definitely want to understand scopes. One might say that understanding scopes is what is going to allow you to write efficient, well-organized, and encapsulated code. So, let's jump right into it and see what are scopes. So, before we begin, what are scopes in general? To put things in simple terms, scope is an area in your code where a certain variable is visible and accessible from. So, while you're coding, you definitely want to be aware of the fact where the variable you are creating is going to be visible and where it's just not going to be. Because when you try to access a variable that is not accessible in certain areas of your code, your compiler is going to complain and throw you an error. And you do not want that to happen, right? In JavaScript, there are three main types of scopes. The first one are global scopes. The second one are local, or also known as function scopes. And the third one are block scopes. So let's jump right into explaining what each of these mean and how you can understand the concept of each of these scope types. First things first, we'll be starting our discussion with global scope. Any variable declared or created, in simpler terms, outside of any function in your JavaScript code is going to be regarded as a global variable. Or when you create a function without putting it inside of other functions, it is going to be a function in the global scope. So basically what this means is that all the variables and functions created in global scope are going to be accessible and available or visible in entirety of your code base. Let me show you what I mean. And here we are in our IDE, where we can find the code I have prepared for you. So we have a single variable called global var, and its value is a string which says I'm global. And we also have a function which is called display global var, and we just invoke this display global var function under it. So what we have here is a console log where we want to display the value of global var from the display global var function. And also we have another one which is just inside of the global scope, and we just want to display the value of global var. So when we run this code, we should get two I'm global messages, which is exactly the case. So everything seems to be working as expected. And as I explained in theory, we have a function that is declared outside of any other function, and also a variable that is defined outside of any function. So basically both of these are created in global scope and will be accessible from entirety of the code base. And now that we're familiar with global scope, it's time to extend our knowledge and start understanding what local or function scope is. Basically, as the name function scope suggests, each function creates its own personal scope. And what this means is that each variable created inside of a function can be accessed only from that function and all the functions that are created inside of the scope of this function. So basically, if we have outer function and inside of it we have another function, we can access from this inner function all the variables that are created in the outer function. But on the other hand, when you want to access that variable from the function, from the global scope, you will not be able to, because it is bound to the scope of this function, and outside of it, the variable does not exist. Let me show you in action. And here we are, back in our IDE, where I have prepared a simple code snippet right here that we are going to go through and explain how it works and what it does. So, we have outer function. Inside of it we have a single variable called local var, and also we have inner function where we are logging the value of this local variable that we have defined here, and then we just invoke the inner function and again log the value of the local variable. So when we run this code, we are going to get the following scenario. We're going to invoke the inner function, because the outer function is invoked here, and we are going to get in here, we create the variable, then we invoke the inner function where we are logging the value of the local variable, and also, once again, we log the local variable value once more. So when I run the code, we should get twice printed the local variable value. And here it is, I'm local. Why did I comment out this part right here? Let me uncomment it and run the code again. And now we get an error which states local var is not defined here. And why is that? Well, that is because we are trying to access it from global scope, even though this variable was created specifically inside of outer function scope. So outside of the outer function scope, this variable does not exist. Have that in mind, it's very important, because that is how the closures and many other concepts in JavaScript rely on that fact. But other than that, everything seems fairly straightforward, right? And now let us cover the final type of scopes in JavaScript. I'm talking about block scopes. With the introduction of ECMAScript 6 version of JavaScript and the introduction of let and const keywords, which are basically introduced in that version of JavaScript, they have introduced a concept of block scopes. So what is a block scope? A block scope is a scope created by if statements, for loops, while loops, do-while loops, and things of those sorts. So whenever you are starting a new block of code, whenever you use the squiggly brackets, you are basically creating a new block scope. Of course, when not considering function scopes, because they also use squiggly braces. So, when you are creating a new if statement, for loop, or whatever of that type, you are basically creating a new block scope. And when you instantiate a variable which is defined as let or const inside of that block scope, it will not be visible outside of it. So, when you try to access these variables outside of the block of the if or for statements, they will not be visible. But do not take my word for it, let's jump right to our IDE and let me show you in action. And here we are, we have a very simple example in front of us. We have an if statement where the condition is always true, we just want to enter this block right here, and basically we have created a new variable called block var, where we have provided the string value that we are printing using console log. And when I run this code, everything works as expected. We are just printing this piece right here. But when I uncomment this line right here and run the code again, everything is going to break, because this block var is not present in the global scope. It only exists in the block scope created by if statement. So always be aware of that. This new type, third type of scopes in JavaScript, is introduced and will work only when you're using let or const keywords to define your variables. So if I were to create a new var right here and define it as test, and now I want to print out test, it will work. Why is that? Well, because we did not use let or const keywords. We used var, and to var keyword, the block scope does not apply. So when I change this to const and run the code again, we again get a reference error, because both let and const keywords only work within the block where they are created. I hope it makes sense now. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have prepared a final test of your acquired knowledge about scopes in JavaScript. I want you to pause the video right now and try to figure out what is going to be printed and when we are going to get errors in this code, and why, of course. So take a minute, pause the video, write down your answers, and then we will go through all the lines together, define what are the issues, what are the results we will be getting, and why that is the case. So pause the video right now. Now let us discuss what were the results of the code we have right here. When I run it, everything explodes in quite a few places because we have a lot of reference errors created on purpose. Let's say on purpose. So let us go one line at a time and discuss what is happening here. First of all, what I like to do is to collapse all the functions so we would have easier time navigating what is going on in the code. And in this case, it's very simple. We have just created a single global variable and we have defined test scopes function. Then we just invoke this function and we have some console logs. But we will come back to those after we have discussed what test scopes function does. So you should just be aware of the fact that we are immediately after we have defined global variable, we are invoking test scopes function. So let's see what we have inside of it. First thing, we have created another variable called the local var. Then we have a block scope created by if statement, where we are creating one let and one const variable. Then we are printing them, so this is the first printing, have that in mind, and these should be fine. They should not have any issues because we are printing variables that are defined inside of the block scope, and we are printing them inside of that same block scope. So these two lines should be fine. Then we proceed to the next line where we are printing local var. And because we are doing it in the scope of the function where this variable was created, we are good to go. This is not an issue. But we are then trying to print block var and block const values. These two are block variables that do not exist here. So I will have to comment them out if I want this code to run. Then we proceed into the inner function scope. Inside of it, we are creating another variable called inner local var. And we are printing the value of it and the value of the local var that was created in the test scopes function, which is basically the parent scope of this inner function scope. So we should be good to go in both of these. And also, we're printing the global var, which is widely accessible across the entirety of the application, so we are good to go here as well. Then we have the part where we are just invoking this function, so it's all good to go, and we are trying to print the inner local variable, which is defined in the inner function, and we are trying to print it in the test scopes function. So here it does not exist. We have to comment it out if we want our code to run. And then we are basically done with the test scopes function. We can collapse it again and then come back to this part right here. We are trying to print global var, which is fine. We can access it because it's a global variable. Then we are trying to print local var, which is created inside of test scopes, and it's limited to that function scope. It does not exist outside of it, so we will comment it out. We also have block var and block const, which are both created inside of the test scopes function and inside of a block scope inside of that function scope. So they do not exist double time, one might say. So let me comment them out, and now we went through the entirety of the code base and basically commented out everything that should be a problem. Now when I run the code, everything should be working as expected. So I want you to take a look at your piece of paper or wherever you wrote your answers, go through them and try to figure out if you made any mistakes. If you did, at least you learned something new, and if you did not, I want to say congratulations, you understand scopes in JavaScript. Understanding scopes in JavaScript is one of the core concepts you must master very, very deeply. You must understand how it works completely if you want to be able to grow and become a great developer. So, just to be sure, if you do not get a firm grasp on these concepts, you will expose variables that you're maybe not supposed to expose, or encounter many of the pitfalls that are very commonly happening to developers while working with JavaScript. So, to keep things simple, you have global scope, which is accessible from entire application. You have function scope, which is created for each function you define, and basically it means that all the variables created inside of that function are going to be visible only inside of that function. And finally, you have a block scope, which means that when you are using let or const keywords to define a variable, that variable is going to be visible only in the block where it was created. And that is it. Not too complicated. And in the next video, we'll be extending our knowledge with the concept of scope chaining. Sounds interesting? Well, that's what I thought as well. So I kindly invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you do not miss the upcoming uploads. Thank you for watching and have an amazing day. Happy coding!